In the northern lands of Europe, where icy seas crash against rocky shores and winter nights stretch on for months, there lived a people whose stories were as fierce and wild as the world around them. The Norse, farmers, sailors, and warriors who braved storms and crossed vast oceans. To them, the world was alive with mystery, filled with unseen powers that could never be tamed. When the wind howled through the mountains, when thunder cracked the sky, when the aurora shimmered across the heavens, they saw the signs of gods at work. They told stories, not gentle fables, but hard, solemn truths, passed down in smoky halls by the voices of skalds, the poets. These myths explained the beginning and the end, the struggles of gods and giants, the place of humanity caught between them. Over the next hour, we will walk the path of this mythology from its very beginning. We will step into the void before creation, watch the cosmos take shape from fire and ice, and see how gods and mortals alike struggled against the forces of chaos. And as we travel, you may notice something remarkable. These stories, though ancient, still echo within us today. They speak of courage in the face of doom, of fate that cannot be avoided, of beauty and destruction, and of a world where even the mightiest gods must fall. So close your eyes, let your imagination open, and together, let us return to the moment before all things, when there was only darkness, silence, and the yawning void. At the beginning of time, there was nothing. No earth beneath, no sky above, no stars to guide a traveler. Only Ginnungagap, the great yawning emptiness. Imagine it, a silence so vast that it had no beginning, no end, no measure. To the north of this void lay Niflheim, a realm of bitter cold and endless ice. Its rivers, called Elivagar, flowed with venom and froze solid as they reached into Ginnungagap. To the south blazed Muspelheim, a land of fire and unbearable heat, where sparks and molten rivers raged, guarded by the fire giant Surtur with his flaming sword. For uncounted ages, these two realms remained apart, neither touching the other. But slowly, the ice and rime of Niflheim crept into the gap, while flames and sparks from Muspelheim drifted outward. When frost and fire met, they hissed and melted, forming drops of water. And from that mixture of opposites, life stirred. The first being to emerge was Ymir, the primordial giant. He was vast beyond comprehension, a creature born of chaos itself. As he slept, new life seeped from his body. From the sweat beneath his arms, a male and female giant were formed. From his legs, another son was born. These were the ancestors of the frost giants, fierce and wild. But Ymir was not alone. From the ice also came Audumla, a great cosmic cow. She fed Ymir with her milk, sustaining his strength. Audumla herself fed by licking the salty ice blocks. Day by day, she licked until a new form emerged. First hair, then a head, then a whole body. This was Buri, the first of the gods. Buri fathered a son named Bor, who in turn married Bestla, a giantess. Together they had 3 sons, Odin, Vili, and Ve. These brothers were not like the giants. They possessed wisdom, will, and vision, and from the moment of their birth, they sought to bring order to the chaos. Yet the world was still dominated by Ymir and his countless offspring. The brothers knew that no new order could exist while he reigned, and so they rose against him. A great battle shook Ginnungagap, and in the end, Ymir was slain. His fall was catastrophic. Blood poured from his wounds so vast that nearly all of the frost giants drowned. Only one Bergelmir survived, climbing aboard a crude wooden ark with his wife. From him, the race of giants continued, always enemies of the gods. From Ymir's body, the brothers created the world. His flesh became the land. His bones rose as mountains. His teeth and shattered bones became stones and pebbles. His blood formed seas and lakes. His skull the dome of the heavens. To hold it high, they placed 4 dwarves, Nordri, Dudri, Austri, and Vestri, at the 4 corners of the sky. His hair grew into trees, and from his brain they shaped clouds. The world was now formed, but it was dark. So Odin and his brothers took sparks from Muspelheim and set them as stars across the heavens. They captured 2 great fires and placed them in the sky as the sun and moon, each driven by a chariot. Yet these chariots were chased by wolves. Shul pursued the sun, and Hati hunted the moon. And one day the wolves would catch them. At the heart of creation stood Yggdrasil, the world tree. Its roots reached deep into the realms, and its branches touched the heavens. Around it, 9 worlds came into being. Asgard, the shining realm of the gods. Midgard, the world of humans encircled by oceans and protected by a great wall. Jotunheim, the wild land of giants. Alfheim, home of the light elves. Svartalfheim, domain of the dwarves. Vanaheim, where the Vanir gods dwelled. Muspelheim and Niflheim, the primal realms of fire and ice. And finally, Hell, the cold, shadowy place where the dead without honor were sent. Yet even in this new order, all things were bound by fate. Beneath Yggdrasil, at the Well of Urd, sat the Norns, 3 women who spun and cut the threads of destiny. They were named Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld, the past, the present, and what is yet to come. Not even Odin, the greatest of gods, could escape what they decreed. For the Norse, this was the truth of existence. The world was born from violence, carved from the body of a slain giant. It was fragile, held together by the roots of a tree, gnawed at constantly by serpents and beasts. It was fated, its end already woven into time. And yet within this harsh vision, there was also beauty in the stars that burned, in the tree that bound the realms, in the courage of those who lived, knowing their doom was certain. This was the beginning of all things, cosmos forged from struggle, destined to end in fire and ice. And from here, the stories of gods, men, and monsters would unfold. When the world had been shaped from the body of the giant Ymir, when the sky had been lifted, and the stars set into their courses, the sons of Bor, Odin, Vili, and Ve turned their gaze upon the new creation. They saw that the land was beautiful yet silent. It was filled with seas and mountains, forests and rivers, but no voices to walk among them. So, upon the shores of Midgard, the brothers found 2 fallen trees. One was ash, tall and firm. The other was elm, slender and graceful. From these lifeless trunks they carved the first man and the first woman. Odin gave them breath and spirit, the spark of life itself. Vili gave them intelligence, the power of thought and movement. And Ve gave them their senses, their sight, hearing, and speech. These first humans were named Ask and Embla. They became the ancestors of all humankind, dwelling within Midgard, protected by the walls the gods had built. Thus men and women came into being, but they were not alone in this cosmos. High above them in Asgard, the shining realm of the gods, the Aesir dwelled. They were not eternal, nor all-powerful, but they were strong, cunning, and noble, shaping the fates of both gods and mortals alike. Odin, Allfather. Foremost among the Aesir was Odin, called the Allfather. He was the god of wisdom, war, and poetry. Tall and imposing, he often cloaked himself in a wide-brimmed hat and a dark cloak, wandering the worlds in disguise. But his wisdom had come at a great cost. Odin hung himself upon Yggdrasil, the world tree pierced by his own spear, for 9 long nights. In this ordeal of suffering and sacrifice, he sought knowledge beyond the grasp of any god. At last the runes, symbols of power and magic, revealed themselves to him. By enduring death and returning, Odin mastered the runes and the secrets of fate itself. Yet even this was not enough. To drink from the well of Mimir, whose waters contained unfathomable wisdom, Odin offered one of his eyes. He plucked it out and cast it into the depths of the well. From that day forward, his face bore the mark of sacrifice, one eye gazing upon the world, the other lost forever to knowledge. Odin was a seeker, always searching for greater understanding, even though he knew that wisdom brought sorrow. For with every secret he uncovered, he drew closer to the fate that awaited even the gods. Thor, defender of Asgard. If Odin was the wise and cunning father, then Thor, his son, was the mighty protector. With red hair and a booming laugh, Thor was a god of thunder, storms, and battle. But unlike Odin, who often relied on cunning, Thor met his enemies with brute strength. He carried Mjolnir, the hammer forged by dwarves, a weapon so powerful it could crush mountains. When hurled, it always returned to his hand. With it, Thor defended Asgard and Midgard from giants, who constantly threatened to break into their worlds. Thor rode in a chariot drawn by 2 goats, Tangrisnir and Tangjoster. Remarkably, he could slaughter and eat these goats at night. And by morning, so long as their bones were left unbroken, they would be whole again, ready to pull his chariot once more. Though mighty, Thor was not without flaws. He was quick to anger, and his solutions were often violent. Yet to the people of the North, Thor was a beloved figure. He was strength and protection, the god who shielded humankind against the chaos of giants. In the rumble of thunder, they heard his hammer strike. In the flash of lightning, they saw his fury unleashed. Frigg, mother and queen. Beside Odin stood Frigg, his wife, queen of Asgard, and goddess of love, marriage, and destiny. She was a figure of wisdom and foresight, though she seldom revealed what she knew. It was said that Frigg could see the future, but unlike Odin, she did not share her knowledge openly. Instead, she held her silence, carrying the burden of fate quietly. Her halls, called Fensalir, were places of warmth and refuge, where she wove clouds from the threads of the sky. To mortals, she represented the sanctity of hearth and home, the gentle side of divine power. Yet even she could not escape sorrow, as her most beloved son, Balder, would one day meet a tragic fate. Balder, the beloved. Balder was the shining son of Odin and Frigg, a god of light, purity, and beauty. So fair was his presence that no darkness could touch him, and all who saw him loved him. To ensure his safety, Frigg traveled the world and asked every being, every stone, every plant, to swear an oath never to harm him. Only the mistletoe, small and fragile, was overlooked. Because of this, the gods would often amuse themselves by hurling weapons at Balder, knowing he could not be hurt. But this invulnerability and its one weakness would one day bring catastrophe to Asgard. Heimdall, watchman of the gods. At the edge of Asgard stood Heimdall, guardian of the Bifrost, the rainbow bridge that connected the realm of gods with Midgard. Heimdall was ever watchful, needing less sleep than a bird, and able to see for hundreds of miles even in the dark. His hearing was so keen he could hear the grass grow, or wool upon the back of a sheep. Heimdall would one day sound his great horn, Gjallarhorn, to announce the coming of Ragnarok, the final battle. Until then, he remained ever vigilant, guarding against the approach of giants and chaos. Tyr, god of oaths. Another of the Aesir was Tyr, the one-handed god of law, justice, and oaths. In earlier ages, he had been a god of war, but over time he became associated with honor and the binding of promises. Tyr's courage was unmatched, for he alone dared to place his hand in the mouth of the monstrous wolf Fenrir as a pledge of trust. When the gods betrayed Fenrir and bound him in chains, the beast snapped Tyr's hand away. From that day forward, Tyr carried both the mark of sacrifice and the reputation of unwavering bravery. The Aesir and the Vanir, but the Aesir were not the only gods. Across the realms dwelled another tribe, the Vanir. These gods were associated with fertility, prosperity, and the cycles of nature. Among them were Njord, god of the sea and wealth, and his children, Freyr and Freya. Long ago, the Aesir and Vanir clashed in a brutal war. Neither side could claim victory, and in the end, they made peace. To seal the truce, they exchanged hostages. Njord and his children came to live in Asgard, while some Aesir went to Vanaheim. This union brought both tribes of gods together, though tensions sometimes lingered. The world of the gods was complex, filled with wisdom and folly, love and betrayal, strength and weakness. They were not perfect beings, nor were they immortal in the truest sense. They were powerful, yes, but subject to fate, bound by destiny just as mortals were. For the Norse, this was both comforting and sobering. Their gods were not untouchable, flawless figures far removed from the world. They struggled, sacrificed, and suffered just as men did. And in that shared struggle lay a kind of truth, that courage is found not in escaping doom, but in facing it head on. This was the world of Asgard, shining halls filled with feasting and laughter, but also shadowed by the knowledge that one day even gods must fall. Among the gods of Asgard, there was one who never seemed to fit. A companion of Odin, a companion of Thor, a presence in many of the great stories, yet never quite trusted. His name was Loki, the trickster, the shapeshifter, the one who could not be bound by rules or loyalty. Loki was not counted truly among the Aesir by blood. He was the son of a giant Farbauti and a goddess Laufey. Yet through cunning, charm, and wit, he gained the favor of Odin and was welcomed into the halls of Asgard. There he walked beside the gods, sometimes their friend, sometimes their betrayer. No other figure in Norse mythology embodies such contradiction. Loki was clever beyond measure, his tongue sharp, his schemes often ingenious. He could change his form at will, a salmon, a bird, a mare, even an old woman. He was at times indispensable, solving problems the gods could not. Yet he was also dangerous, sowing discord and misfortune. The gods laughed at his jokes and cursed at his betrayals, and as time passed, his path would darken until it led only to ruin. Loki the Helper. In the early days, Loki was more ally than enemy. Many of the gods' treasures were his doing, though not always by honest means. When Thor's wife Sif fell asleep, Loki crept upon her and cruelly cut off all her golden hair. Thor's rage was swift, and Loki, fearing for his life, promised to replace her hair with something even more beautiful. He traveled to the dwarves, master craftsmen of Svartalfheim, and persuaded them to forge new hair from strands of pure gold, which grew upon Sif's head as if natural. The dwarves also forged other treasures at Loki's urging: Odin's mighty spear, Gungnir, which never missed its mark, and Freyr's golden boar Gullinbursti, whose mane lit the darkest night. Another group of dwarves in rivalry created treasures of their own: Skidbladnir, a ship that could fold into a pocket, and most importantly, Thor's hammer, Mjolnir. Though the handle was shorter than intended due to Loki's mischief, the hammer became the greatest weapon of the gods. Thus, even in his pranks, Loki brought fortune. Without him, Asgard would not have possessed many of its greatest treasures. Loki the trickster. Yet Loki's schemes were not always harmless. His nature was restless, his mischief often cruel. Once the gods built a great wall around Asgard to keep out the giants. A mysterious builder came and offered to complete the work in one season, but only if the gods gave him the sun, the moon, and the goddess Freya as payment. At first, the gods refused, but Loki, ever persuasive, convinced them to accept, thinking the task impossible. Yet the builder worked swiftly, aided by his powerful stallion, Svartalfari. Realizing the gods were about to lose the sun, moon, and Freya, the Aesir turned their fury upon Loki. It was he who had suggested the bargain, and it was he who must fix it. So Loki transformed himself into a mare and lured away the stallion. The builder could not finish his work without the horse, and when his true nature as a giant was revealed, Thor slew him with his hammer. But Loki, in mare's form, soon gave birth to a strange offspring, an 8-legged horse named Sleipnir. This remarkable steed, swift beyond all others, was given to Odin, becoming his favored mount. Once again, Loki's mischief brought both chaos and unexpected gain. The darker side. But Loki's deeds grew darker with time. He mocked the gods openly, stirring resentment. In one tale, at a feast in the halls of Aegir, Loki insulted each god and goddess in turn, revealing their secrets, mocking their weaknesses. The laughter he once brought turned to unease, then to hatred. And it was through Loki that one of the most beloved gods would perish. Balder, son of Odin and Frigg, was the shining hope of Asgard, a god so fair that all things loved him. His mother Frigg, to protect him, had taken oaths from every creature and object that they would never harm him. Only the mistletoe, so small and harmless, was overlooked. When Loki learned of this, his mind turned at once to mischief. He fashioned a dart from mistletoe and placed it in the hand of Balder's blind brother. Unwittingly, Hoder cast the dart, and it pierced Balder's heart. The light of Asgard was extinguished. The gods wept. They begged Hel, goddess of the underworld, to release Balder. She agreed, on one condition: that all things in the world must weep for him. And all did: stones, trees, beasts, and men. All but one. A giantess refused, and so Balder remained in the realm of the dead. Some say the giantess was none other than Loki in disguise. Loki's children. From Loki's unions came children who embodied doom itself. With the giantess Angerboda, he fathered 3 monstrous offspring. The wolf Fenrir, destined to devour Odin in the last battle. The serpent Jörmungandr, so vast it encircled the world, fated to clash with Thor. Hel, a half-living, half-dead being who was given rule over the underworld. These children were feared by the gods. They bound Fenrir in chains, though only after Tyr sacrificed his hand. They cast Jörmungandr into the ocean, where he grew so large he bit his own tail, and they sent Hel to the realm of the dead, where she ruled over those who did not die in battle. Yet by trying to contain Loki's children, the gods only ensured the very fate they feared, the binding of Loki. After Balder's death, the gods could no longer tolerate Loki's presence. They hunted him down. He tried to hide, transforming into a salmon and leaping through rivers. But Thor caught him in his strong hands. the gods dragged Loki into a cave. There they bound him with chains made from the entrails of his own son. A serpent was placed above him, dripping venom onto his face. His wife Sigyn remained beside him, catching the venom in a bowl. But whenever she turned to empty it, drops struck Loki's skin, and his writhing caused the earth itself to quake. So Loki lay bound, filled with rage and bitterness, until the day of Ragnarok, when his chains would break and he would lead the armies of chaos against the gods he once called kin. Loki is perhaps the most human of the Norse gods. Clever, flawed, and contradictory. He is both creator and destroyer, helper and betrayer, a companion and an outcast. Through him, the myths reveal a truth the Norse understood deeply, that chaos is never far away, that even among friends betrayal may lurk, and that laughter can quickly turn to sorrow. He is the trickster whose stories amuse, but also the shadow that ensures no joy lasts forever. And it is through Loki, more than any other, that the doom of the gods begins to unfold. Norse mythology is filled with gods and giants, with tales of cosmic creation and inevitable destruction. Yet, just as important to the people of the North were the stories of men and women, of heroes, kings and warriors who lived under the shadow of fate. For though humans dwelled in Midgard, far below the shining halls of Asgard, they too were bound into the great web of myth. The sagas reminded listeners that mortals, like gods, lived in a world shaped by courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable hand of destiny. The world of men. The Norse people imagined Midgard, the realm of humankind, as a great circle of land surrounded by an ocean so vast that none could cross it. In those waters lay Jörmungandr, the world serpent encircling all, his coils rising in waves, his breath stirring storms. Humanity was shielded from giants and monsters by a wall built by the gods themselves. Yet life was never safe. Crops failed, winters starved villages, and enemies lurked across the seas. In this world, bravery and honor mattered more than life itself. For though death came to all, those who met it with courage might find themselves carried to Valhalla. There in Odin's hall, the bravest warriors feasted and fought until the end of days. Others might be taken by Freya, goddess of love and battle, to her own hall of the slain. But to die in fear or without honor was to be forgotten, or worse, to drift into hell's cold realm. The Valkyries. It was the Valkyries, shining maidens of Odin, who chose the slain. Clad in armor, they rode across battlefields on winged steeds, gathering the souls of warriors who fought with valor. To hear the beat of wings above in the fury of battle was to know the Valkyries were watching. In Valhalla, these warriors, the Einherjar, spent their days training for Ragnarok, the final battle. At night, they feasted, drinking mead served by the Valkyries themselves. Their endless cycle of combat and celebration prepared them for the day when Odin would summon them to stand against the giants. For the Norse, this vision of the afterlife was not gentle peace, but eternal readiness for the struggle to come. The Norns and fate. Even more than the gods, mortals felt the weight of the Norns, the weavers of destiny. At the roots of Yggdrasil, they spun the threads of all lives. From the greatest king to the humblest farmer, their names were Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld, past, present, and future. What they decreed could not be undone, not even by Odin himself. This belief gave Norse sagas their unique power. A hero might fight bravely, he might win glory, but he could never escape his fate. And yet this inevitability did not weaken them. Instead, it gave them strength, for if death was certain, then what mattered was how one lived, with courage, loyalty, and honor. Heroes of the sagas. Among the many tales of mortals, none are as famous as the saga of Sigurd the Dragon Slayer. Sigurd was a hero of the Volsung line, a family cursed and marked by fate. Raised in the care of a smith, Sigurd was given the shards of a broken sword called Gram. With great skill, the smith reforged it into a blade of unmatched power, sharp enough to cut through an anvil. With Gram in hand, Sigurd confronted the dragon Fafnir. Once a man twisted by greed into a monstrous serpent, Fafnir guarded a vast hoard of treasure, cursed by the gods. Sigurd dug a pit along the dragon's path and lay in wait. When Fafnir crawled above him, Sigurd thrust Gram upward, piercing the beast's heart. As Fafnir lay dying, he warned Sigurd that the gold would bring nothing but ruin. And indeed, though Sigurd claimed the treasure, His life would be consumed by betrayal and tragedy. His story, passed down through generations, became one of the greatest heroic epics of the North, echoed even in later works such as the legends of the Nibelungs and the sagas that inspired Wagner's operas. Other mortal tales. There were other heroes too. Grettir the Strong, a mighty outlaw whose life was marked by both feats of strength and endless misfortune. Egil Skallagrimsson, a warrior and poet whose sagas reveal both ferocity in battle and hauntingly beautiful verses. Gunnar of Hlíðarendi, famed for his unmatched skill with the bow, yet doomed by betrayal. These sagas blended history and myth, their heroes larger than life yet rooted in real struggles of loyalty, vengeance and survival. For listeners in longhouses across the North, these tales were not distant fantasies, but echoes of their own lives, reflections of the dangers, hopes and hardships they knew all too well. Rituals and the sacred. Myth and daily life were not separate for the Norse. They made offerings to the gods for harvests, victories and safe journeys. Animals, and sometimes even humans, were sacrificed in sacred groves or at great gatherings called blots. At Uppsala in Sweden, a great temple stood where sacrifices were said to have been made to Odin, Thor, and Freyr. The Norse also practiced Seder, a form of magic often led by women called vulvas. Through chants, trances, and ritual, they sought to see the threads of fate, to bend destiny if only slightly. Odin himself was said to practice Seder, though it was often considered unmanly for men, a reminder of his willingness to transgress for wisdom. Runes, too, were not mere letters but symbols of power. Carved into stones, weapons, or charms, they carried magical weight, a legacy of Odin's sacrifice upon Yggdrasil. To carve a rune was to call upon the hidden powers of the world, mortality and meaning. To the Norse, the line between gods and men was thin. The gods themselves could die, and men could, in their bravery, be remembered alongside them. What mattered was not to escape death, but to face it with honor. This is why the sagas ring with both sorrow and pride. The heroes they celebrated rarely ended in peace. Most met betrayal, exile, or violent death. But so long as their names were remembered, so long as their deeds were sung, they achieved a form of immortality. The skalds who recited these tales ensured that the memory of the heroes lived on, carried in verse from one hall to another. In this way, mortals too became woven into the fabric of myth, the human thread. The sagas remind us that Norse mythology was not only about gods high above, but about the human struggle below. Every farmer, every warrior, every sailor braving storm-tossed seas was part of the same world that birthed Odin, Thor, and Loki. They were all bound by fate, and all could find meaning in courage and loyalty. This balance between divine myth and human story gave Norse tradition its depth. The gods shaped the cosmos, but it was the men and women of Midgard who lived its truths. Their sagas, like the myths, were not written down for centuries but carried in memory, a living reminder that though the world is harsh, bravery can grant eternal honor. And so the sagas stand as bridges between worlds, connecting gods and mortals. Myth and history, fate and freedom, all things in the Norse cosmos were bound by fate. Even the gods, mighty though they were, could not escape the destiny woven by the Norns. And the greatest destiny of all was Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. It was not merely the end of one story, but the end of the cosmos itself, when fire and ice would clash once more, and even the gods of Asgard would fall. The first signs. The coming of Ragnarok was foretold in prophecies whispered by seers, recited in halls and feared by gods and mortals alike. The first sign would be the death of Balder, the beloved son of Odin and Frigg. When Balder fell to Loki's trickery, struck down by a dart of mistletoe, the gods knew that the first stone of doom had already been set in motion. After this would come Fimbulwinter, the Great Winter. 3 successive winters, unbroken by summer, would fall upon Midgard. Snow would bury the world, winds would cut like blades, and men would turn against one another. Brothers would kill brothers, fathers would betray sons, and the bonds of kinship would be shattered. It was in this time of chaos that the wolves who had long chased the sun and moon would finally succeed. Skell would devour the sun, plunging the world into darkness, while Hati would swallow the moon, leaving the skies black and starless. Even the stars themselves would vanish from the heavens. The breaking of bonds. As the world fell into ruin, the ancient chains that bound chaos would finally shatter. The great wolf Fenrir, bound in fetters made from the roots of mountains. The sound of a cat's footfall, and the beard of a woman would break free. His jaws would stretch so wide that they scraped the sky and the earth at once, devouring all in his path. From the seas, Jormungandr, the world serpent, would rise, stirring the oceans with his coils. He would flood the lands, spraying venom across the skies. His thrashing would tear ships apart and drown coastlines. From Muspelheim, Surtur, the fire giant, would march with his flaming sword. His armies of fire would cross the Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge, which would shatter beneath their weight. The sky itself would burn with their coming. And from the underworld, Loki, freed from his bonds, would lead the legions of hell. At his side would march the dishonored dead, carrying their grief and rage into the final war. The armies of chaos, giants, monsters, and the dead would assemble upon the field of Vigrid, vast and endless where the last battle would be fought, Odin's last stand. The gods, too, would gather their forces. From Valhalla, Odin would call forth the Einherjar, the chosen warriors who had trained and feasted for this day. From Freya's hall would come her own slain warriors. Together, gods and men would march to meet their doom. Odin himself would ride at the front, astride Sleipnir, his eight-legged horse, with Gungnir, his spear, in hand. But his fate was already sealed. Across the battlefield, Fenrir awaited him. The great wolf, jaws wide, would devour the All-Father whole. Yet Odin would not fall unavenged. His son Vidar, the silent god, would step forward. Placing one foot upon the wolf's jaw, Vidar would tear Fenrir apart, ripping him asunder and avenging his father's death, Thor and the serpent. Meanwhile, Thor would face his greatest enemy, Jormungandr, the world serpent. Time and again, Thor had fought the serpent, striking blows but never ending its life. At Ragnarok, their final confrontation would come. Thor would lift Mjolnir and strike the serpent. With a blow so mighty, it would shatter mountains. Jormungandr would fall, slain at last, but the victory would cost Thor his life. He would stagger 9 steps before collapsing, poisoned by the venom of the serpent, his body lifeless upon the battlefield. Loki and Heimdall. Among the chaos, Loki, the betrayer, would at last meet his fate. On the field of Vigrid, he would confront Heimdall, the watchman of the gods. The two had long been destined to destroy one another, and here prophecy would be fulfilled. They would fight fiercely, each striking mortal wounds until both fell, their bodies lying side by side. Surtur's flames, and still the battle raged. Freyr, the god of prosperity, would fight Surtur, but lacking his magical sword, he would fall. Tyr, the one-handed god, would slay the hound Garm, guardian of hell, but perish from his wounds. One by one, the gods of Asgard would be struck down. At last, when the field was silent but for the groans of the dying, Surtur would lift his flaming sword high. The fire of Muspelheim would sweep across the world, burning forests, boiling seas, and turning mountains to ash. The sky would collapse, the earth would sink into the sea, and all creation would be undone, the end and the beginning. Yet in the ashes of destruction lay the seeds of rebirth. For Norse mythology, unlike some, saw the end not as final, but as part of a great cycle. From the waters, a new world would rise, green and fertile. Where once flames had consumed, new life would grow. The sun, though devoured, would have left a daughter, who would take her place in the sky, brighter than before. 2 humans, Lif and Lifthrasir, who had hidden in the branches of Yggdrasil, would emerge to repopulate the earth. They would drink the morning dew and raise new generations. Among the surviving gods would be Balder, returned from the realm of the dead, shining once more. Vidar and Vali, sons of Odin, would endure. Modi and Magni, sons of Thor, would inherit their father's hammer, Mjolnir. Together they would rebuild in the light of a new dawn. Thus, though Ragnarok was doom and destruction, it was also renewal. The cycle of death and rebirth, winter and spring, fire and life continued. For the Norse, this vision was both grim and hopeful. It reminded them that nothing lasts forever, not even the gods. Yet from every ending comes a new beginning. The meaning of Ragnarok. For the people of the North, Ragnarok was more than myth. It was a mirror of their world. Harsh winters, sudden storms, famine, and war could destroy everything they had built. Yet still, life continued. Just as the gods faced their doom with courage, so too must men face theirs. The lesson was clear: fate cannot be avoided, but it can be faced with honor. The world ends, but it begins again. Death comes, but life returns. The gods fall, but courage is eternal. In the aftermath of Ragnarok, the world would find itself forever changed, but not entirely destroyed, though the gods of old had fallen in the great battle, their lives extinguished in the flames of Surtur's sword, or lost to the jaws of Fenrir. The story was far from over. From the ashes of their defeat, new gods would rise, and the world would begin anew, just as it had so many times before. In Norse mythology, the idea of destruction was always tied to the idea of rebirth. This was not a final end, but another chapter in the endless cycle of creation and destruction. The children of the gods, even though Ragnarok had claimed so many gods, the progeny of these fallen heroes would continue to shape the future of the cosmos. Among the survivors were two sons of Odin, Vidar and Vali, who would take their father's place as leaders in the new world. With their might and wisdom, they would help guide the rebuilding of the universe, ensuring that it would be protected from the chaos that had nearly destroyed it. Balder too would return. His death had been one of the early signs that Ragnarok was coming, and his resurrection marked the renewal of hope in the post-apocalyptic world. Balder, with his radiance and purity, would lead a new generation of gods who would rise to take the place of the fallen, Aesir and Vanir. His return signaled that the light of Asgard was not truly gone. It had only been hidden, waiting for the right moment to shine again. The gods who survived the final battle, those like Modi and Magni, the sons of Thor, would inherit their father's hammer. Mjolnir, despite Thor's death at the hands of the world serpent, his legacy would continue through his children, who would wield the hammer with the same power and determination that had made their father one of the mightiest of the Aesir. Thor's influence would live on in them, and they would be the protectors of Midgard, guarding it from the forces of chaos that had once threatened it. As the new world took shape, the gods would live alongside humanity, guiding and protecting them. The bond between the divine and the mortal would be strong once more, and the gods of old would continue to watch over the world they had once ruled. The enduring power of the myths of the Norse gods have endured for centuries, not because they are simply stories of a distant past, but because they speak to the fundamental truths of the human experience. The gods of Asgard, with all their flaws and strengths, serve as reflections of the human condition, the struggles they faced, from their battles against the forces of chaos to their acceptance of their own mortality, resonate with us because they echo our own struggles. Even in the face of certain death, the gods of the Norse pantheon faced their fate with honor, bravery, and defiance. They showed that while fate may be inevitable, the way one faces it can make all the difference. In a world that constantly changes, the Norse gods remain a reminder of the enduring power of resilience, courage, and the belief that even after the greatest of destructions, there can be renewal, hope, and new beginnings. As we look to the future, the lessons of the gods will continue to live on. The legacy of the Aesir and Vanir is not merely a thing of the past. It is a living tradition, one that shapes our understanding of the world and our place in it. The myth of Ragnarok, the death and rebirth of the gods, reminds us that the end is never truly the end. Even in the darkest of times, there is always the promise of a new dawn. Norse myth in later centuries. Even after the Middle Ages, Norse mythology continued to echo in the culture of Scandinavia. Folklore kept alive the memory of trolls, elves, and hidden beings. Place names across Norway, Sweden, and Iceland still bore the marks of gods long past. Fields named for Thor, springs for Freyr, groves for Odin. In the 19th century, as Europe rediscovered its ancient roots, Norse mythology experienced a great revival. Scholars, poets, and composers looked to the sagas for inspiration. Richard Wagner, the German composer, drew heavily from Norse and Germanic legend in his famous operas, shaping the modern imagination of Valkyries and dragon slayers. Writers such as William Morris and later J.R.R. Tolkien wove echoes of the Eddas into their own epic works, carrying the spirit of Norse myth into modern fantasy, influence on modern culture. Today, Norse mythology lives not only in books and scholarship, but across popular culture. Marvel's Thor brings the thunder god to movie screens worldwide. Though transformed into a superhero, television and novels revisit the Viking Age with renewed fascination. Video games, from God of War to Assassin's Creed, Valhalla, immerse players in worlds shaped by Yggdrasil and Ragnarok. Even language carries the old gods forward. Wednesday, the Woden's Day, recalls Odin. Thursday, Thor's Day, honors the Thunderer. These names, spoken casually each week, are remnants of a time when the gods were called upon daily. Yet beyond entertainment, Norse mythology continues to resonate because of its themes. The inevitability of fate, the courage to face doom, the cycles of destruction and renewal. These are ideas that still strike deep in the human heart. Why the myths endure. The myths of the Norse were not polished, gentle tales. They were raw, often harsh, reflecting the reality of life in the north. The gods themselves were flawed. Odin sacrificed his eye for wisdom, but could not escape sorrow. Thor was mighty, yet doomed to fall. Loki was clever, yet brought only ruin. These were not distant, perfect beings, but reflections of humanity's own struggles magnified. Perhaps this is why they endure, because in them we see ourselves. The fear of loss, the desire for knowledge, the hope for honor, the inevitability of death, these are universal. And though the Norse gods could not avoid their fates, they faced them with defiance and courage. For the Vikings who heard these tales, and for us who remember them, that defiance is a lesson as much as a story. In the aftermath of Ragnarok, the world would find itself forever changed, but not entirely destroyed, though the gods of old had fallen in the great battle, their lives extinguished in the flames of Surtur's sword, or lost to the jaws of Fenrir. The story was far from over. From the ashes of their defeat, new gods would rise, and the world would begin anew, just as it had so many times before. In Norse mythology, the idea of destruction was always tied to the idea of rebirth. This was not a final end, but another chapter in the endless cycle of creation and destruction. The children of the gods, even though Ragnarok had claimed so many gods, the progeny of these fallen heroes would continue to shape the future of the cosmos. Among the survivors were two sons of Odin, Vidar and Vali, who would take their father's place as leaders in the new world. With their might and wisdom, they would help guide the rebuilding of the universe, ensuring that it would be protected from the chaos that had nearly destroyed it. Balder too would return. His death had been one of the early signs that Ragnarok was coming, and his resurrection marked the renewal of hope in the post-apocalyptic world. Balder, with his radiance and purity, would lead a new generation of gods who would rise to take the place of the fallen, Aesir and Vanir. His return signaled that the light of Asgard was not truly gone. It had only been hidden, waiting for the right moment to shine again. The gods who survived the final battle, those like Modi and Magni, the sons of Thor, would inherit their father's hammer. Mjolnir, despite Thor's death at the hands of the world serpent, his legacy would continue through his children, who would wield the hammer with the same power and determination that had made their father one of the mightiest of the Aesir. Thor's influence would live on in them, and they would be the protectors of Midgard, guarding it from the forces of chaos that had once threatened it. As the new world took shape, the gods would live alongside humanity, guiding and protecting them. The bond between the divine and the mortal would be strong once more, and the gods of old would continue to watch over the world they had once ruled. The enduring power of the myths of the Norse gods have endured for centuries, not because they are simply stories of a distant past, but because they speak to the fundamental truths of the human experience. The gods of Asgard, with all their flaws and strengths, serve as reflections of the human condition, the struggles they faced, from their battles against the forces of chaos to their acceptance of their own mortality, resonate with us because they echo our own struggles. Even in the face of certain death, the gods of the Norse pantheon faced their fate with honor, bravery, and defiance. They showed that while fate may be inevitable, the way one faces it can make all the difference. In a world that constantly changes, the Norse gods remain a reminder of the enduring power of resilience, courage, and the belief that even after the greatest of destructions, there can be renewal, hope, and new beginnings. As we look to the future, the lessons of the gods will continue to live on. The legacy of the Aesir and Vanir is not merely a thing of the past. It is a living tradition, one that shapes our understanding of the world and our place in it. The myth of Ragnarok, the death and rebirth of the gods, reminds us that the end is never truly the end. Even in the darkest of times, there is always the promise of a new dawn. As we draw our journey to a close, let us take a moment to reflect on what the Norse myths have taught us. These stories, crafted over 1,000 years ago by voices that carried through the night, still resonate with us today. They are timeless, reminding us of the fragile nature of life, the courage needed to face it, and the truth that though all things pass, memory and legacy endure. The world these myths describe was born of fire and ice, a place where opposing forces collided to create existence itself. In the beginning, there was only Ginnungagap, the Great Void, and from it emerged the elements that would shape the cosmos. The land of fire, Muspelheim, and the land of ice, Niflheim, met in this vast emptiness, and where they collided, the first beings were born. This world, harsh, unpredictable, and ever-changing, is reflected in the very essence of Norse mythology. It is a world where the struggle for survival is constant, where chaos and order are in a constant tug of war, and where nothing lasts forever. The gods and their struggles. At the heart of these myths stand the gods of the Aesir and Vanir, two tribes of deities that shaped the world with their strength, wisdom, and determination. These gods were not perfect beings, immune to the trials of existence. They were flawed, just as we are. Odin, the All-Father, sacrificed his eye for wisdom and knowledge, always searching for more insight into the future and his place in the cosmos. Thor, the mighty thunder god, wielded Mjolnir with power, yet even he could not escape the inevitable doom that awaited him at Ragnarok. The gods of the Norse were not distant and unattainable. Rather, they were reflections of the human condition. They were powerful yet vulnerable, capable of great feats of heroism, but also destined to face their own mortality. Their stories teach us that even the mightiest beings must confront the inexorable march of time, and in doing so, they do so with courage and honor. The gods were never content to simply wait for their fate. They actively shaped the world around them, striving to make it a better place for both gods and mortals. And then there were the heroes, the men and women who walked the earth, driven by courage, honor, and a sense of duty. These were the warriors who lived with the knowledge that death would come for them. But they chose to face it head-on, living lives that were full of valor, strength, and ambition. The warriors who fought in Valhalla, awaiting the final battle of Ragnarok, were not just preparing for a future war. They were embracing life fully, knowing that their fate had already been written. Their lives were not defined by what they feared, but by what they believed in. Ragnarok, the end and the beginning. At the heart of these tales lies Ragnarok, the great battle that would mark the end of the gods, the world, and the cosmos itself. Yet, even in the face of this ultimate destruction, Ragnarok was not the final word. It was not an end, but rather a beginning. The destruction of the old world, the fall of the gods, and the ravages of fire and ice were not simply an annihilation. They were part of a greater cycle, the inevitable transformation that would allow for a new world to rise. The Norse vision of the cosmos is one of perpetual change, of cycles that repeat, of death and rebirth, of endings that lead to new beginnings. The gods who perished in Ragnarok, including Odin, Thor, and Freya, did not simply vanish into oblivion. Their death was a necessary part of the cosmic order, one that allowed for the renewal of the earth. From the ashes of the old world, a new world would rise, a green, fertile, and ready to be populated by the survivors. It is here that we find the most profound message of the Norse myths, that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable destruction, there is always the possibility for renewal. This idea of cyclical time is embedded in the Norse worldview. The end is never truly the end. Just as the winter gives way to the spring, just as the night gives way to the day, so too does the world renew itself after the greatest of tragedies. The gods may fall, but from their deaths, New heroes and new gods would rise to carry on the legacy of their predecessors. The eternal power of fate. Central to the Norse understanding of life is the concept of fate. The Norns, the three sisters who controlled the threads of destiny, wove the fate of gods and men alike. No one, not even the gods, could escape the weave of fate that had been spun for them. This was the ultimate lesson of Ragnarok, that fate is immutable, and no matter how powerful or wise one may be, it is impossible to avoid what has already been determined. Yet despite the inescapable nature of fate, the gods and heroes of the Norse myths did not cower before it. They embraced it. They met their destinies with courage, honor, and defiance. Odin's willingness to sacrifice his eye for wisdom, Thor's tireless defense of Midgard, and the bravery of the warriors in Valhalla all reflect a refusal to submit to fate in fear. Instead, they faced their end with the same valor they showed in life. For the Norse, fate was not a curse, but a challenge, one that could be met with strength and resolve. This attitude toward fate is something we can all learn from. In our own lives, we face challenges, setbacks, and even the certainty of our own mortality. The Norse gods and heroes show us that while we cannot control our fate, we can control how we meet it. Courage, strength, and honor are the true measures of a life well lived. The timeless wisdom of the Old Norse. These myths, passed down through generations by skalds and storytellers, have endured for over 1,000 years because they speak to the universal truths of human existence. They are not just tales of gods and monsters. They are reflections of our own struggles, hopes, and dreams. The Norse myths remind us that life is fragile and that we must embrace every moment, for time is fleeting and unpredictable. The courage to face our fate, the strength to fight for what is right, and the knowledge that even the greatest of challenges can lead to renewal. These are the lessons of the Norse gods. Though the world may change and life may be uncertain, these eternal truths remain. And so, as we look to the skies and see the thunder roll, or the northern lights dance above, let us remember the voices of the Old North. Let us remember the gods who fought for their world, the heroes who lived with courage, and the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The myths of the Norse are not gone. They live within us still, whispering their timeless wisdom, urging us to live with honor, to face our fate with courage, and to know that even as the world changes, we are part of something greater, a story that began long ago and will continue on, long after we are gone. For the gods of the North, in all their glory and their flaws, are not just figures from a distant past. They are part of the fabric of our own world, woven into the stories we tell, the challenges we face, and the hope we carry for the future. As we close this chapter, remember the myths of the Norse are not just stories. They are a reflection of life itself. They remind us that though all things pass, memory endures. And in the end, that memory is what keeps the gods alive. Long after the last battle has been fought, long after the last light has faded, the next time thunder rumbles across the heavens, or the auroras light up the night sky, take a moment to listen. The old gods are still speaking. They are with us always, guiding us, reminding us of the cycles of life and death, and of the new beginnings that always follow an ending.